Hi Bio 212 students, welcome to week 2. We will be reading through 1126-31 this week. Due at the end of the week will be your week 2 assignment on Connect, as well as your week 2 forum, in which you'll need to do both an original post of at least 250 words and 2 replies to 2 separate classmates of 100 words at least. You can also use one of your replies if somebody replies to your post and you want to reply to them on your post, that's fine as well. As long as you're meeting the minimum word requirements, you will get full credit. And participation is earned, or I should say attendance is earned, by participating in these forums. Please let me know if you have any questions on that. So this week we're working through a little bit more of Chapter 51. We talked last week about, let me see if I can get this to advance. We talked last week about definitions and a background of the medical assistant's role in pharmacology. We worked through the definitions you see on this screen, as well as some sources of drugs and how drugs act on the body and what the body does to drugs once they're in the body. This week, we will be talking about drug names and categories, looking at that big chart that's included in the reading. We'll be talking about the FDA and the regulation of drugs, and over-the-counter drugs versus prescription drugs, and last but not least, pregnancy categories. So, you might hear a drug referred to by 3 different names. Usually 2 out of 3 of those are going to be the most common. The first one is the drug's generic name, which is the official non-proprietary name of the drug. So you guys might be familiar with amoxicillin. It's been a generic for a long, long time because the brand or trade name, Amoxil, was founded and patented years ago. The generic name is the name that will stick with the drug forever, and we'll talk about patents in a minute, but it might be similar to going to the grocery store, down the cereal aisle especially, or really any aisle these days. You have the brand name, maybe Cocoa Puffs, and then you have the store's brand or a sort of more generic brand of the same cereal sold possibly at a lower price, with the same taste, we hope, and just a different look to it because it's not using all of the marketing that the brand or trade company does. The trade name is the brand or proprietary name, and that is the name that is picked out by the company to represent their medication. So an example we gave was Amoxil being the trade or brand name, and amoxicillin being the generic name. Now the chemical name is usually made up of a lot of numbers and a lot of confusing words, and it's very long. You probably don't need to use this one too often, as it is only truly for the chemical aspect of the drug, and it's not something we use to communicate about the drug very often. So a generic name, again, is just the drug's simple name, straightforward, not owned by anybody. It can be used by any generic company that's manufacturing that drug, whereas the brand or trade name is used by the company who originally created the drug. For each new drug marketed by a manufacturer, the United States Adopted Names Council selects a generic name. This name is non-proprietary and again does not belong to the drug company who made the drug. So, the drug company who made the drug gets to select the drug's brand or trade name, and that is protected by copyright. No other manufacturer can make or sell that drug for 17 years, sometimes even longer if the company applies for a patent extension. When the patent runs out, the manufacturer can sell the drug under a generic name or a different trade name, assuming they maybe come up with a different indication or dosing scheme. And this is something that drug companies will do to extend the amount of time that they can make money off of that drug. The original manufacturer, however, is the only one who's allowed to use that trade name. So any generic company can use any generic name that is off patent. So amoxicillin's been off patent for a while. Any drug company could pick that up and make it. There is a recipe out there to make it exactly the same as the brand, and there will be no difference if the patient takes Amoxil or amoxicillin. So a licensed practitioner, like let's say a doctor or a physician's assistant, can prescribe the drug by either its brand or trade name. When that prescription gets sent to a pharmacy, like Walgreens or CVS, the pharmacy will fill it with the generic unless it is only a brand and only available as a brand. If the provider, the doctor or the PA or NP, wants the drug to be dispensed as a brand, even though there's a generic available, they would write DAW or dispense as written on the prescription. Usually, brand medications are going to be more expensive than generic medications, especially even though they may be covered by insurance. You may pay a $40 copay instead of a $20 copay if you're getting a brand versus generic. Now, this isn't always easy when the drug doesn't have a generic available. The brand may cost a lot of money, and the insurance company only covers a part of that cost. So as drugs become generic, they usually lower in cost. So how do we categorize drugs? Drugs are categorized by their action on the body, general therapeutic effect, or the body system affected. So this chart has some of the most popular categories in medications, and I highly suggest that you review it and be familiar with the drug category and the action of the drug. You don't have to memorize the examples, but knowing where to find information about your medications is important as well. So for example, in the first line, drug category, analgesic. An analgesic, it relieves mild to severe pain. This could be Tylenol, that's the brand name. Generic name would be acetaminophen, aspirin, morphine, or oxycodone. If we go further down, we see antihypertensives, reduce blood pressure. And they give you a few examples there as well. So a lot of times when we tell patients that we are prescribing them medications, we might tell them what the drug category is to help them get a general idea. Hey, Mrs. Smith, we gave you an anticoagulant. It's going to help prevent your blood from clotting, and the brand name is Coumadin. This helps patients understand how the drug acts overall, because they may not be familiar with the actual brand name. Drug names can be frequently confused. Let me just see. Drug names can be frequently confused because they either look or sound alike. We call that LASA, look-alike, sound-alike. This is where errors can happen, so it's important to be aware of the look-alike, sound-alikes. That way you don't get your medications confused, and if you ever have any questions, you should always clarify with the doctor or nurse practitioner or PA who wrote the prescription. So the common drug names such as amlodipine could be confused with amiloride. Over on the other page, you see paroxetine could be confused with fluoxetine or duloxetine because they sound similar. You'll often find that drugs in the same class have similar endings, such as those fluoxetine, duloxetine, and paroxetine. Those are all actually used for depression, and paroxetine and fluoxetine are technically in the same class. Duloxetine is in a slightly different class. So you always want to make sure that you're enunciating your medications and clarifying them if you are concerned that they might be a look-alike, sound-alike. So the Food and Drug Administration requires that drug manufacturers perform clinical tests on new drugs before humans use the drugs. So these drugs go through a lot of testing. There's actually, I believe, 3 phases before a drug gets approved into market. And then the 4th phase is what we call post-marketing. And when the post-marketing phase is going on, the drug company is receiving reports about the use of their drug and updating the information on side effects, uses, etc. So in the beginning, though, we first test on animals, unfortunately, as well as groups of healthy volunteers. In the middle, probably phase 2, we're looking more at the population who the drug is going to be used in. If the clinical tests prove the drug is safe and effective, the FDA approves it for marketing in phase 3. The manufacturer must continue to demonstrate the drug's safety and efficacy and must submit reports whenever it discovers unexpected adverse reactions. The FDA has the option to withdraw a drug from the market anytime if evidence says that it's safe or ineffective. This is known as a recall. Sometimes recalls might be due to a contaminated product, an inspection of a facility that's manufacturing that didn't pass inspection, or an overall recall and removal from the market because a drug is too unsafe for the patients and population to use. The FDA also regulates drug manufacturing in general. It requires that drugs shipped between states have the proper identity, strength, purity, and quality. Each manufacturer must consistently identify each drug by a particular color, form, shape, size, and label, and there are labeling requirements. The FDA also regulates over-the-counter drugs, and some complementary and alternative medicines such as vitamins and supplements. We're going to hold on the FDA and CAM information because I believe there's a section at the end for this particular purpose. MedWatch is a voluntary reporting program to talk about adverse events noted during clinical care. So if your patient has an adverse event that you feel is important enough that needs to be submitted, and we're not probably talking headache or nausea, vomiting, we're talking very serious adverse event in which the patient could have experienced harm, being submitted to MedWatch. This is something that pharmacists do quite frequently in order to make sure that drug companies are aware of the need to follow up on that adverse event. So, What's the difference between over-the-counter and prescription drugs? Over-the-counter drugs you can buy without a prescription. You don't need a licensed healthcare practitioner to give you a piece of paper or an electronic script to be able to pick up over-the-counter drugs. You might be familiar with Tylenol, cough and cold medications, certain supplements, maybe even topicals to put on an injury like a wound. The number of prescription drugs that are turned over to over-the-counter status is actually increasing to make them more accessible to the general public. Although they are usually safe to use when used as directed on the packaging, patient education can help a lot to contribute to even safer use. Sometimes when we mix over-the-counter drugs with prescription medications, we run into problems, so it's always helpful to know all of the medications that a patient is on, including over-the-counters, prescriptions, vitamins, herbs, etc. Prescription drugs can only be ordered by a licensed practitioner. They must be dispensed by a licensed healthcare professional, such as a pharmacist, physician, podiatrist, licensed midwife, just to name a few. Some prescription drugs are available at much lower strengths as over-the-counter medications. For example, ibuprofen is available as a prescription up to 800 milligrams, but over-the-counter you'll always only see 200 milligram tablets. Last but not least, pregnancy categories. Because clinical trials are not typically done on pregnant women, because of what we call equipoise and vulnerable populations, I'll have you know prisoners and children are also included in this category. A lot of the data about the effect of medications on those populations, specifically in this case we're talking about pregnant women, are obtained after FDA approval when pregnant patients are using the medication. So drugs can cause defects to unborn babies if taken during pregnancy. Prior to June 2015, we labeled those drugs as A, B, C, D, or X based on the degree to which they were determined to cause negative events or negative outcomes or have risk to the fetus. A and B were considered relatively safe to take. C and D and X were probably don't take all the way up to X, which is a absolutely not. This has been proven to harm unborn babies. After June 2015, it was determined that we needed more comprehensive labeling and needed more information for providers to be able to determine if we should be using it in pregnant patients or those who are lactating. So we broke it up into pregnancy, lactation, and females and males of reproductive potential. So these new labels include pregnancy exposure registries that collect and maintain data on the effects of medications used in pregnant women. So now you might see this medication is considered safe for use in pregnant women. This study X showed the outcome Y. So it's more of a paragraph that you're reading as opposed to a designated letter, and the person who's reading that paragraph is responsible for determining if they'd like to use it in their patient. So a little more risk, but a lot more information. So this continues to change. You may still see some drugs labeled with that A, B, C, D, or X, but many of them are switching over to that more informative, sort of written out risk of the medication. So that covers our reading for this week. If you guys have any questions, please feel free always to reach out by email. I'll be posting office hours that are completely optional, up to you to join if you'd like to. I'll be posting those by tonight or tomorrow, and those will arrive as an invite in your email, or you can see them on our course announcements, and you can go to Teams and hit your calendar button to join the meeting when it's time. I hope you all have a great week too. Talk to you soon.